Man, you do a couple of neutral drops and people just lose their mind, right? Why are you doing neutral drops? You're gonna break things. Yeah, but actually, it was a poorly executed neutral drop that did it, and I'm going to explain all of this stuff as we go along. But first, the reason for the neutral drops, in case you guys haven't been following, because we've covered this time and time and time again. When we set this car up, it was to do a long distance haul. So literally zero consideration was given to any type of performance tuning. It's got a relatively tall tire with 323 gears, so figure it's like a 294 gear with regular tires, and it's got a tight converter. It's supposed to be like 2,500 RPM, it doesn't even stall that high. In the meantime, it's got a cam that starts working at 3,500 RPM. So if you try to power brake this thing, even in water, okay, it's going to be pathetic. You know, eek, 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 eek. It's one of those things until it comes up on the pipe and then she'll make smoke, which is the whole purpose of neutral dropping it yesterday. The neutral drop. All right, so I can understand a lot of guys who weren't around in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s. I can understand them not appreciating what the neutral drop is and the purpose, the reason for the neutral drop, and why it was actually a standard operating procedure, let's say, in the 70s. So prior to 1970, 71, there was no such thing as a high stall converter. All of the converters you were using were the factory high stall converters, which they'd stall at like 2,200, 2,300 RPM, the higher stall ones. Cams, on the other hand, there was no shortage of camshafts. Cam grinds, performance cam grinds, were almost all intended to be used with a stick, because up until the very early 1970s, nobody ever messed with an automatic car. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody ever messed with one, but few people messed with them. Most people with performance cars, building for performance, did it with a stick. So, bringing up the RPM to 3,000, 4,000 RPM, and then hitting the clutch, well, fine, car will rock out. But when you put a cam in an engine that doesn't start working until 3,000 or 4,000 RPM, and the converter only stalls at like 2,500, what do? There are no high stall converters available. The ones that first started coming about in 1970, 71 were like 3,000 RPM converters. And they were expensive, considering what they were at the time. So in other words, like a high stall converter in 1970 was like a $250, $300 piece. That was a lot of scuttles back then. So only somebody who was really well off or serious about building a car could afford something like that. Even through the 1970s, all through the 1970s, they stayed high. They stayed a higher cost for them than the average street rat would go for. So it was typical that if you had let's say, for me, I use my example, right? You've got like a 70 GTX, okay? You got a cam in this thing, and you got like 323 gears because you need to drive it places, and you can't afford a converter. When you go street racing with this thing, you're neutral dropping it. You bring it to like 3,000, 3,500, you pull it down into gear, push it in, whatever it is, to get it into gear, and as soon as you feel it hit, you throw the gas up. And actually, now, let's explain the proper way to do a neutral drop. Because again, I've done thousands of neutral drops, and in the future, I will do thousands more neutral drops. The correct way to do a neutral drop, so you minimize the chance of hurting anything in the transmission, is to bring up the motor to a steady state. So let's say you're looking at like 3,000, 4,000 RPM. You bring it up to a steady state and you let it, you don't give it foot. You don't give it any foot. You drop it into gear, and as soon as you feel it hit, that's when you hit the gas. When I broke the tranny yesterday, it was because I drove into the neutral drop. And to explain how this works now is that without putting any force behind it, just the momentum of the engine, you can take all of the slack out of the drivetrain, keep the RPM high, take all the slack out of the drivetrain, get the thing to start moving or break the tire a little bit, and then give it gas. So that this way, you're not shocking it and following through at the same time. You're supposed to shock it, then follow through. That's how you do a successful neutral drop. I screwed up yesterday. I just powered into the damn thing. Hey, I'm out of practice. I haven't done it in many years. All right. So, what breaks? Oh, one other thing. I gotta talk about one other thing too. And this is where the comments, you guys in the comments drive me out of my mind. So there's lots of people like, oh, you know, it neutral drop, you're out of your mind, right? Now, if I had set this car up originally with a clutch flight, if I had put a clutch flight together, everybody would be like, cool, yeah, old school clutch flight, do it, right? What exactly is a clutch flight? A clutch flight that performs exactly the same purpose as a neutral drop, right? So instead of using hydraulics to go from neutral to drive or low, you're using the clutch. It's the same exact shock loading, exact. Trans braking also implies a lot of those same loads, but trans braking is a different thing entirely. The clutch flight came about in the 1960s for exactly the reasons that I'm talking about. And they had clutch turbos too. There was another very popular one, the GM. But for Chryslers, it was a clutch flight. And all they would do was take a standard Torqueflite just like this, cut the bell housing off, add a manual transmission bell housing or scatter shield, and then to supply hydraulic, because you lose the front pump now. So to supply hydraulic pressure to it, they would use a power steering pump. No, actually, I shouldn't say that. There were a couple of different varieties that used like a finger assembly that would turn the pump. But most of them used a separate hydraulic system to. So that's it. That's exactly what a clutch flight is. A clutch flight is a neutral drop. All right. What brakes? What did I break on the transmission? So this is the part that goes, this is the weak link to all Chrysler transmissions. This is the sprag, okay? The sprag is a simple one-way clutch. So I can turn it this way, but I can't turn it this way. You have these rollers and you have these springs, okay? Now, this can fail a couple of different ways. The way it failed in our case was that this part of the sprag assembly is just pressed into the aluminum case. So this is steel, this is hardened steel, and this is aluminum, and there's a serration that runs all the way around, and that's what keeps it from rotating. So when I neutral dropped this thing, this is what let go. This part broke away from the case. The fix for that, the common fix for that is, well, not a fix, because once you've foobarred the case the way I did, you throw the case away. Not a big deal, I have a bunch of them. The proper fix for that is a bolt-in sprag. So instead of using just the press fit, and you could see here, if you look carefully, you could see where the aluminum is staked to create pressure around the sprag assembly to keep it from rotating. See those stake marks? Well, a bolt-in sprag has countersunk holes there, and it actually bolts through the case to the back. So instead of just the serrations, the aluminum holding it in place, you've got those bolts. And that's what let go on this transmission. Now, just for the record, I can absolutely assure you all of the internals in that transmission are perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. When you break a sprag out the back of the case, really the only damaged part is the case itself. So I have a bunch of these, so I'll just swap one out. It's not a big deal. And for the record, the car had to come apart anyway, because as I said, when we put it together, it was to make a 2,000-mile trip. Zero consideration was given to performance tuning. Never touched the carburetors as far as performance tuning goes. Never touched the secondaries. Didn't play around with timing or anything like that. But most importantly, it had a dead stall converter in it. You know, just stock converter. It was supposed to be rated a little bit higher, but it's a factory converter. And they can. The way they stall depends a lot on the cam. So if, let's say, the engine has a stock cam and it makes a lot of low-end torque, well, the converter will stall higher. When you have a cam here that doesn't want to operate until around 3,000, 3,500, it doesn't have enough oomph to work the converter, and so it won't stall at its maximum speed. Does that make sense? And the gears. So at this point of the game, the whole purpose right now was to take the car apart anyway, so we can get it ready to go for the no-name nationals. Actually, it's got to go to the track a few times to get dialed in and get everything together, and then the no-name nationals. So it's got to come apart anyway, guys. Just relax. It's all good. On a positive note, the suspension works really, really good. I'm amazed. If you guys have a Dodge truck, if you've got a Dodge pickup truck, and you have these notorious axle hop issues, and listen to me, right? We did a video on this. Duplicate the setup we have here exactly, and you will have no problems at all. It's perfect. It's perfect. So That's that. So I wanted to bring you guys up to speed. It's like the most misunderstood topic. I can't believe how many people have never heard of a neutral drop, or think a neutral drop is like this forbidden thing. It's just something you do when you've got too much cam and not enough converter, and you've got to get this mass moving. I'll see you tomorrow.